basically 20 meters. So today is the April presentation meeting for the York County Amateur Radio Society, and we have a special guest tonight. Not only is he a guest, but he's a friend. It's Jim Perry from FEPLABS Radio on YouTube. He hosts Sunday morning ham church with Steve, KM9G, and he also co-hosts Ham Nuggets on Monday night with Temporary Offline, KM9G again. So he is a
we're like hetero life partners,
yeah, brilliant designer, great guy with a 3D printer, and very knowledgeable radio guy, understands antennas and a whole bunch more than I do. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Perry and let him go at it.
I feel like we must be at a political rally with that intro. Wow. Okay. My goal here is to not seem incredibly stupid or say anything wrong. So hopefully I can achieve that. So DMR, I've done, and I do regular videos as well as the 2 live stream things I do. DMR is the digital voice mode, if you didn't know what that was, that strikes fear into everybody, because the general consensus is DMR is so complicated, and it's got a lot of moving parts, and it can be, compared to some of the other digital modes like Fusion, for example. Yaesu's is just ridiculously easy to set up. D-Star, once you can figure out the user interface on whatever D-Star radio you have, you're probably okay, but that usually is the hard part of D-Star. DMR came out of Motorola at some point in history. Motorola calls it Moto Turbo now, but it's still DMR. I don't want to get too much into the history of DMR. Hams have embraced it, but when it was originally created and it was used for and designed for commercial and public safety application. And even today, there are public safety departments, police, fire, whatever, that still use DMR. So it's kind of a fleet setup thing. They also use NXDN, which is a first cousin of DMR, and P25, which is also one of DMR's other cousins. They're slightly different, but they're all very similar. Fusion actually uses some of the features of DMR, but they have simplified it down and got rid of the fleet portion of it. And I don't want to get into that too much more than I just did. That is a rabbit hole that would take a couple hours of me jabbering at you. So what is DMR? DMR is Digital Mobile Radio, is what the acronym stands for. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Somebody have a question? Okay. So, where was I? So the big thing with DMR, and I'm going to try and work slides and remember to look at the camera and not read my fabulous slides. All right. Those are coming through, right? Okay. So DMR has what's called a code plug, and that's, I believe, Motorola terminology from back in the day. And all it is a configuration file. That's all it is. The name is fancy. It's a config file for your radio. Literally, at its base, it is no different than you setting up a configuration for your FM only radio, loading your CPS software, whether it's Chirp or the vendor software that came with the standard FM radio, be it Yaesu, ICOM, Kenwood, whoever, or a digital radio. It's all a config file. They just call it a code plug in DMR. That's what a code plug is. And this config file is the blueprint for how your radio works. So it's got some basic things in it, and every DMR code plug has all these exact things. And the real key to it, and we're going to get to another slide in a minute, is their building blocks. You have to start with block 1 first, and then once you've got block 1 done, you can go on to block 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and so on. You cannot start with block 4 because you're missing the underlayment that is required for block 4 to work if you haven't done 2, 3, and 1. So it's like priming before you paint. You have to sand before you prime. Otherwise, the prime's not going to take. You have to prime before you paint, and then you paint. Same kind of thing with DMR. We've got to prime everything, get it sanded, and do it in the right order, or it's all not going to work. CPS software is customer programming software. Everybody always says CPS software, which is like a little redundant. Customer programming software. But CPS, customer programming software, that is the program that you can use to program your radio. I already mentioned there's Chirp, which is a free CPS program that covers multiple radios. Some of them are DMR, a lot of them are FM. It just depends on the radio and what all the guys doing. Chirp is under active development and has been since I've been a ham, and I've been a ham since September of 19. I am not a COVID ham, regardless of what you heard on the internet. That's an inside joke. If you get it, you get it. So that is how you program your radios with CPS. There are options, there are options for programming. Chirp obviously is freeware. The vendor software that comes with your radio. I will tell you up front that some vendor software is not that good. Some of it is passable and some of it is not bad at all. One thing I have noticed, and I will not name any names, a major Japanese radio vendor released a brand new radio or two. They didn't even have CPS software available for the radio. Literally, the only way to program the radio was to sit at the front panel. So Chirp kind of fills in a lot of that. And then also RT Systems. I'm not sponsored by them. I just think they're a great company. They sell CPS for a huge variety of radios. The major vendors, the minor vendors, the Bush League vendors, all of them. And they sell software for digital radios as well as just analog FM radios. Typically, the software is $25, and depending on the radio, you may or may not have to get a proprietary cable to use their software. Generally, if you can program it with a standard USB cable or the data cable that came with your radio, you're golden. There are some instances where you have to buy a separate cable. So these are the things that you need to get DMR programmed. These are the blocks, the steps I was talking about. So on every radio, whether it is a Baofeng FM radio, I thought I had one here I was going to use as a visual aid. This is not an FM radio exactly, but it'll work. Whether it's a low-end Chinese radio, Baofeng, Radiodity, whoever, and all it does is FM, or whether it's a high-end Kenwood, doesn't matter. They all have a lot of the same things in common. And the first step is the basic setup. What do you want your screen to look like? What do you want? You put in your call sign in some place, fast programming buttons, favorite repeaters, FM stuff. That's all pretty much generic across every radio. And it goes the same with DMR, because all DMR radios will do FM analog as well. So your basic setup, what do you want it to look like, and so on. I've got a cat coming in. Move, go, go, go. She's a stalker. So the second thing, and this is now we're into DMR specific stuff at this point, is the radio identity, your DMR ID. If you don't have one, you can get one from radioid.net. I've had mine since I've been a ham. I don't remember the exact procedure, but I think you have to send them a copy of your license and your name, and they issue you a number. It is a 7-digit number and generally starts with 31 here in North America. It's generally different for other countries, but I assume we're all in America at this point. I'm not sure, but it's going to be a 31 number. So you've got to have that first, and that is the first DMR building block that has to go into the radio. Is you have to tell the radio, this is your radio ID number, and that radio ID is tied to your call sign. So WT1W is the same as 315-2157. That's my DMR ID, and they are tied together. The second thing that you need to do, and this is in multiple steps, and we're going to kind of look at some screens. The second piece to the DMR specific building blocks on this chart, number 3, is talk groups and individuals. So that database that issued your DMR ID also has a database of all the DMR IDs in the entire world. And there are multiple places where you can get the DMR database. So if I only want DMR call signs from Alabama, I can go to this site and tell it I only want United States and I only want Alabama. And then I can download a literal contact list of all the DMR IDs that show up in the database as being in Alabama. Now, and we'll talk about this a little later as well, but one thing is a DMR radio has some number of contacts it can hold. And when I say contacts in this context, I mean call signs and DMR IDs. So NJ4Z is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. AA0AM is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever. Depending on the age of your radio, it may not be able to hold the entire DMR ID database. This becomes important to another feature we're going to talk about down the road. So you may have to be a little particular about what DMR IDs you load, what contact IDs you load. Your DMR ID is the first thing. This is the second thing. So if I anticipate that I'm going to want to call people on a regular basis, I may want to download some contacts. And I can download the whole database and edit it. It's a CSV file, a comma separated file. So you can edit it out. And if you just want to pick, and I'm just picking names, if I just want Danny and John and Andy, I can download the whole database, find Danny, John, and Andy, and that's all I can save to my radio. If I have a newer radio, depending on the radio, it may have enough memory storage to store the entire DMR database. I have a older BTEC 6X2 DMR radio that holds 150,000 contacts. There are 240,000 total in the DMR database now, so that radio will not hold all of them. So you have to pick and choose. You don't have to load user DMR IDs. That is just, if you're going to do it, this is the place to do it. So I hope that's clear. I hope I didn't get too far convoluted on that. The second thing that's part of the contacts is talk groups. Talk groups are also similar to digital contacts. And I'm actually going to kind of go a little faster on this slide, and we're going to see some examples of this stuff. So a talk group is, Alabama link is 31010. That is the talk group for Alabama link. So I want that in my radio. If you want to talk on a talk group, you need the talk group ID and some name in there. Now, you don't have to call it Alabama link. You can call it the Hillbillies in Alabama, but as long as the talk group is there, the number, it's good. Then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to set your channels. And this is the part where eyes start glazing over. So a channel is when you assign a frequency and a specific talk group or repeater and individual together, depending on how you set it up. And again, I'm going to show you some examples of that because I want to make sure you guys that part's clear. It's hard for me to explain that one. And then finally, the last piece is zones. And all a zone is a logical collection of channels. So for example, and this may help with the previous thing, we have a DMR repeater here in Montgomery County. So I have a zone called DMR repeater, and I have digital talk groups in the repeater zone because those channels have the repeater's frequency, the receive and transmit with the offset and everything, like you'd set up an FM repeater. However, those are all right, cat. Now she's in my way. Move. So if you have a hotspot, for example, that's going to be one frequency, no offset typically. So you're going to set your radio and put your contacts, either your individual contacts or just your talk groups, in the hotspot zone. So you have a repeater zone, a hotspot zone. Like mine, I have analog channels as well. So they're in the analog zone. So when I flip the radio to that zone, the only channels I see are local analog channels. VHF call, the fire department, whatever, some other stuff, analog repeaters around here. Those are analog channels. Then I have a zone for repeater digital stuff, and a zone for hotspot digital stuff. So that's what zones are, just logical collections of channels. So when you're trying to find something in the radio, you don't have to scroll either by turning a knob or hitting a button 5,000 times to get to private contacts, which might be another zone. And that's where I'd have Andy, John, and Danny listed with their DMR ID. So I could just go to private zone, Danny, boom, click it, and Danny's radio beeps, and we go. So those are the basic blocks. And the slides, I think the slides will help clear up that. I hope that's not too convoluted of an explanation. All right. And guys, I'm sorry, I'm kind of losing my voice here too.
Oh, you're doing good.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, sir. So with reference to CPS and DMR radios, there are not many major vendors that make DMR radios. None of the big three Japanese companies make DMR radios that I'm aware of. Motorola is probably the largest DMR radio vendor. I assume they still make DMR radios. I don't fold enough paper to go buy Motorola radios that do DMR. So most DMR radios, especially the ones you'll see being used on YouTube or around Hamfest, are going to be Chinese radios. And I have absolutely zero problem with Chinese radios. If it works, it works. I don't care where it came from. So the big thing with any of these is the CPS, and all of the radios will have CPS that you can download, or it comes, in the box with the radio. However, the quality of the CPS varies wildly, and the nomenclature that they use for stuff varies wildly between vendors. So the images that I'm showing you here tonight are from the BTEC CPS for the 6X2 radio. And this will probably not look like your Anytone or like your Hytera or insert radio name here. They all have the same thing. It's just not going to be laid out the same because it's a different vendor doing different software. And there's a bit of a quality variation in CPS software. I like the BTEC because it does have a couple of buggies in it, but it works consistently, and the bugs are not anything that is critical. And we'll talk about that in a minute too, because you'll see it on the slide. So step one, I'm going to assume we're going to skip through all the basic setup of the radio, what you want the function buttons to be and all that, because honestly, that's going to vary radio to radio. What buttons you have will vary radio to radio. This is about the DMR side. So ultimate step one is all the basic stuff. We're going to move on to DMR step one, which is setting your radio ID in the radio. On this software, can you guys see my mouse cursor, John? Okay. So on this, in this software, it's under the digital section, which makes sense because it is a digital setting. Radio ID list. If it's only you ever using the radio, you're only going to put one in here, and that would be yours. So, and this is obviously not out of my config because this isn't my ID or my call sign. But this is where you would put in your DMR ID, that 7-digit number that you got assigned through radioid.net, and then your call sign. If you have multiple people sharing one DMR radio, you can see here that you can put in multiple call signs. I don't know what the use case would be for that. I guess if your wife is also a DMR radio user and y'all are sharing one radio possibly, but I can't think of many more use cases where you'd have multiple radio IDs, possibly a club call. Toads, the online radio club that Steve and I started, has a club call DMR ID, so we can use K-Toads, and we would add it in there as well. So for mine, I would have 315-2157, my ID, WT1W, my name or call sign. This guy put in his call sign, but whichever. That's for your edification, not the radios. And then I would have another one with the Toads DMR ID, 319-2083, and K-Toads to demonstrate that it's the club call. But that's got to be step one to get DMR working, because nothing works until that is set up like you see on the screen there. Um, okay, my slide's kind of dorked up. That was probably the AI part that got dorked up. And I mentioned this earlier, user databases. And the user database, when I got into ham radio in 2019, 2020, I could load the entire worldwide DMR database into my BTEC 6X2. I can't do that anymore. I think it has a hard limit of 150 or 200,000 contacts. So if you want everyone's name and call sign in your radio, you need to pick and choose a little bit. There is one way around that, and we'll get to that in a minute. It's not surefire, but it's better. So decide if you're ever going to want to have all those IDs in there. Now, the thing about the IDs, if you put them in, that means if I load the database for South Carolina, let's say, and John calls me, it'll say John Gendron. Or if Danny calls me, it'll say Danny and Danny's call sign every time. If I don't load the user IDs, it'll still work, but I'll just see a DMR ID and have to guess who it is by listening to them talk, or they'll have to tell me. So you don't need to load individual user IDs for everybody, but if you do, it's a little more useful. 240,000 plus users, already mentioned that. So this is the individual user ID listing here out of somebody's radio, mine or somebody else's. And you can see this particular radio over here on the left goes up to 200,000 contacts. So this radio obviously cannot load the entire DMR database. So what I would do, and I do, what I would do is I would load all the US call signs. And that's probably all I'd load. Maybe Canada, depending on the numbers, possibly Australia or Great Britain. But you have to pick and choose. You're not going to be able to load all of them. So this is under the digital contact section, but this is individual users. You can put these in, and then you'll get their information when they key up to you. You don't have to put them in, but if you don't, you're only going to ever see. So this guy, Louis Piccolo, if he calls John and John hasn't loaded this database, all John's going to see is Louis's DMR ID. The next thing we have is talk groups. So talk groups are group calls. If any of you have a background with P25 or NXDN or LTR systems or whatever, those are group calls. IDEN radios back in the day, Nextel would allow group calls. So that's exactly what that is. There are hundreds of talk groups across multiple DMR networks. We're not going to get into DMR networks. I'm basically using Brandmeister in my head as an explanation. Your mileage may vary on a different network. So there's probably, I'm guessing, I don't know, 1,500 to 2,000 talk groups on Brandmeister. I know there's Alabama Link, there's America Link, there's one for pretty much every state in the union. There's one for almost every country. You know, CQ UK is a very busy talk group full of people talking funny because they speak English, but not exactly. So that's what a group call is. Those are the other digital contacts you have to put in. You have your individual digitals and you have your talk groups. With DMR, you can also do private calls, which I've already talked about. If I want to call John privately on John's radio, I could find John in my setup and ping it, and it would call John. The other thing is, and I just want to mention this as an aside, a lot of people are under the impression that digital radio requires the internet. Yes and no. If I'm sitting in Alabama and I want to talk to Gendron, who is in South Carolina over DMR, we got to have internet involved because my 2-meter handheld on a DMR frequency is not going to reach John in South Carolina. Those kind of calls obviously require the internet. And that is the same for all digital modes. None of them are any different. However, what is also the same for all digital modes, as far as I'm aware, we're talking about DMR specifically, but I don't have to have the internet to use digital voice with my digital radio. I can set up a talk group that I make up the number in my head, and I program my radio with that information, and Danny programs his, and John programs his, and we're all at the same event together. We're talking on a digital DMR talk group, all by ourselves, group call, no internet involved, just 2 meter or 440, doesn't matter. So you do not need the internet. If you want to go interstate or planet-wide, obviously you're going to have the internet. But you do not need the internet to use DMR. It can work strictly RF. At your house, you would have a hotspot. Where did I put mine? There it is. I have an open spot here, one of multiple hotspots I've got here, but this is a hotspot. So this is the bridge between RF in, and then this sends it over to the internet. And depending on how you got this set up, it routes it. And this does D-Star, DMR, Fusion, probably a couple others I don't remember off the top of my head. Or you use a repeater. And most of you have probably already heard there's a whole lot of internet-linked repeaters. So a hotspot is kind of a baby repeater. And I don't want to get too much into hotspots, but that's basically what this is. So you can do simplex digital voice. It absolutely works. This is a screenshot of, this is out of my radio, of talk groups. So you have a bunch of different talk groups I've got listed in here. And this is the group name and how many group contacts. We'll get to that one in a minute. So part of this is the name that came out of the DMR database. And then this is what I want to call it, what I want to name the contact. So a lot of DMR radios, lower end ones for sure, will not let you put Alabama space link in it. You may have to shorten it. So it's going to pull it out depending on the database, and then you can change the name to ALLNK or something shorter if you have to. That is not critical. What is not shown in here, which unfortunately on this screenshot, is the talk group ID numbers. And I think they're in a later screenshot, so we'll get to that. But each one of these, so there's Alabama link, and Alabama link is 31010. So I know that that's going to be attached to that talk group contact when I build it. I'm going to go through this one real fast. Receive groups. This is also causes problems for folks. Most DMR radios anymore do not need receive groups. It's an older thing. It's deprecated in every DMR radio I've touched the last 3 or 4 years, and even my 6X2, which is one of the oldest DMR radios I have here, does not require receive groups. I think it's more of a carryover from the commercial public safety side of DMR, but we don't need it, again, in most radios that I've ever seen. So I'm not going to talk about receive groups anymore, other than you don't need them. If you feel you need them, I would not recommend that you put more than one talk group to one receive group, which is what this slide is showing you. I have an Alabama link receive group in here, and it's only got the Alabama link talk group connected to it. You can, and this gets weird, you can put multiple talk groups into one receive group. So technically, your radio would be able to catch traffic on multiple talk groups at one time on one channel. Don't do that. It'll make you crazy. And you'll never know what's going to key up when you key up. Just ignore receive groups unless you know your radio absolutely needs them. The other part of DMR contacts, and this goes for whether it's a repeater setup or a hotspot setup, is the time slot and the color code. Color code is similar to PL tones on repeaters. For a hotspot setup, you're going to use color code 0. Your repeater, I can't remember if there's a semi-standard for repeaters because I almost never talk on the DMR repeater in town. I think I have it programmed in, but I never use it. So typically it's going to be time slot 2 on your hotspot, and on a repeater, depending on your repeater and how it's set up, they may be using both time slots. One time slot would typically be for local talk channels, and one time slot would be for outside talk groups. Repeater DMR gets a little weirder, not as far as you're concerned so much, but a lot of repeater owners will not allow you to change multiple talk groups. So if you're here in Montgomery, Alabama, the repeater owner may not want me connecting to CQ UK or Scottish Ragchew because it's not related to anything here. So the repeater just won't let me connect. If you're using a hotspot, of course, you can connect to any talk group you want to. Time slot is there because depending on how the repeater's set up, DMR uses 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth. They can literally have two separate independent conversations going on time slot 1 with 12.5 kilohertz and one on time slot 2 with 12.5 kilohertz. Your hotspots are only ever going to use time slot 2. That's all I've ever seen. I'm sure there's a reason for it. I don't know. I just accepted it and moved on. And it's my hotspot in my house, so it's not like I can talk in 2 time slots at one time. And this is all part of when you set up the talk group in the radio. And I don't have a good screenshot for this, and I apologize. I wanted to have one and I didn't get one. This is a channel setup, but when you set up the talk group screen, which I don't have the picture of, I'm going to tell it that this is a digital talk group. And then you have the choice of, is this a group call or a private call? So if I'm putting in John's DMR ID, it is a private call. If I'm putting in Alabama link, and I refer to that one because I remember the number. If I'm putting in Alabama link as a talk group contact, that is a group call. All right. So private group. So once you have any specific individual contacts in that you wanted, any or all, take your pick, and you have in the talk groups that you want, then we get to the channels, which is what this screen is showing. Guys, I apologize. My voice is really going and I need to keep my whistle wet here. So this is where zones will come in later. This is where frequencies come in right now. So in this example here, he has got a transmit and a receive frequency of 433,575, which indicates that this is a hotspot most likely. It is a digital channel type, and he's going to set it to low power because if he's in his house, 10 feet from his hotspot, doesn't need high power. The bandwidth for DMR is going to be 12.5K. Keep in mind, this dialogue is also used for analog FM. So that's why there's options here in places where, as far as DMR goes, it's not a choice. But this same dialogue box is used in all these DMR radios because, again, they do FM as well, just straight analog FM. I'm not going to get into some DMR-specific weird things that changes on radios a lot. You can set the channel. This is what TX permit is. You can set the channel so that you're not allowed to key on it. This comes from the commercial public safety side, for example. In the fire department here, we had a P25 trunk system. We have a P25 trunk system. They allow us to monitor the sheriff's office, both their main dispatch and their TAC. We can't key up on those channels. I can press the button all day, but it will not let me key on those channels. I have to switch to fire to key to talk to the same people. I just have to do it on the fire channel. So that's what TX permit is. The only reason some of this stuff is in there, again, because DMR comes from public safety commercial usage. You can do scan lists, and I will tell you the same thing about scanning on a DMR radio that I would tell you about scanning on an analog radio. Unless you've got a real reason you want to monitor multiple talk groups, I wouldn't do it because, number one, it scans so slow. And number two, like any scanner, when there's a conversation going on, the scan function is going to hold until the squelch goes back. So if you're scanning multiple DMR talk groups and you're monitoring America Link, which is an incredibly busy talk group, your radio may just end up locked on America Link for an hour on end. Because I swear during the day, half the state of Florida is on America Link all day. So I just recommend against scanning. And then on top of that, none of these radios scan very fast. They're all incredibly slow scanning. But again, it's a leftover feature from the commercial origins of DMR. So this is this guy's radio ID. This is a different one than I showed in the other slide, but this is what he called the radio ID, which is probably his call sign. And that is tied to his DMR ID. For this particular setup, he is using color code 1. He's on time slot 2. And he has got a received group list of everybody, and encryption is turned off. Note on encryption, We're not allowed to encrypt. We're supposed to transmit in the clear. Almost all DMR radios have some functionality as far as encryption goes. I will tell you that the encryption between Model A of brand A and Model B of brand B is probably not the same. There's no standard on the encryption. So if you ever plan to do encryption, be aware of that. It's best to stay within radio model if you plan to encrypt at some point for some reason, like in a balloon up situation or whatever. So this is, the channel is where we tie all this together. And then here is my channel list out of my 6X2. And you can see here, so right here is a zone. I know it's a zone because I got them grouped together, but you'll notice that they're all in the same frequency, 433.25 for transmit and receive. This is one of my hotspots. This is my DMR hotspot, is on 433.25. All these channels, you'll notice, are all digital. They're all on low power because, again, it's my hotspot in the house. No tone decode, no encode. The channel names, the contact name. This is where I put this in the CPS. What radio ID I'm using these with. Obviously, this is the 6X2. That's what I named it, my radio ID, when I put in 315-2157. I don't know why, but I called it DMR 6X2. Probably because I didn't know what I was doing when I first set it up. So these are all in my hotspot zone. And remember, I mentioned zones are just a logical collection of channels. So on the 6X2, I can turn the knob or push the arrow, I don't remember which off the top of my head, and change zones. So if I'm sitting in my house with my hotspot, I don't want it on the repeater zone, and I don't want it on the analog zone. I want it on the hotspot zone. Likewise, if I'm talking on the local repeater, I'm going to have the Montgomery repeater zone. If I'm in Orlando, for example, at Hamvention or Hamcation, I'm going to have it in the Orlando repeater zone with just Orlando repeaters. So whatever zone I'm in is going to have the same kind of channels in it, all digital on a hotspot, all digital on a repeater, all analog, whatever. So this is the way I have it set up, and this is the zone layout. So these are all hotspot contacts for my DMR hotspot here in the house, and all the channels I have in there, all the contacts I have. This is analog, because you'll notice all these are analog with different power and different bandwidths on these. And there's the fire department, so it has a tone. I can't scroll. I'm used to scroll. I was going to scroll this screen, and every time I scroll, it moves the slides. Here is the local repeater right here in this zone, and I named these because I want to know it's Alabama link, but I also need to know it's on the repeater as opposed to my hotspot on the screen. So I have a /R after it to indicate to me that it's a repeater contact. But you'll notice it uses the same talk group here as up here. Again, Alabama link I'm picking on. I'm on the same literal talk group. However, I'm going through the local Montgomery repeater as opposed to my hotspot. How are we doing on time, John? We good? Or? Y'all are so quiet.
You're 38 minutes in. You're good.
Okay. I don't hear any snoring. I guess y'all are muted.
Yeah, I mean, I have everybody mute.
Okay. So anyway, then these down here are, oh, yeah, okay. So this is a little bit of mix and match. This is open spot DMR setup for a different open spot than this one. I got one in my truck. And this is the DMR setup for my open spot in my truck. Hence the /OS afterwards. But you can see this is a little mix and match. So I've got Steve's private DMR ID contact in there. I've got Southeast USA. I've got USA link, Alabama link, the radio check, Parrot talk group, and some other stuff. So 4 zones, basically. And these you can set up and slice and dice any way that makes sense in your head. I'm not saying this is the right way. This is the way I do it. But that's what a zone is. It's just a collection of channels that make sense in your head to all be together, because all the DMR radios have a zone function, and this is what zone is for. So instead of scrolling through a list of 38 separate contacts trying to find KM9G, I can just go to my open spot zone and key up my radio, and I know that I'm going to hit KM9G on that because it's using the right frequency for that hotspot. I'm going to try and wrap this up so we get a few questions in if you guys want. Okay, I talked about all that. This is how I do zones. You can also, and I don't think I mentioned this, but you can also do zones based on club events. So if you guys are going to have an event you're at or field day or whatever, you can make a separate zone for field day frequencies. If you're assisting in an event or your races or Aries group, a zone is whatever channels make sense to you to be in a small group together. That's all. So these are zones right here that are out of my 6X2, and this is what I call them. I have an analog zone. This is the Montgomery repeater, the KK4AXA. This is my house DMR hotspot. This is the open spot that's in my truck, and that is the hotspot I used to have in my shop, which I don't anymore, but I've just never deleted it out of here. So this is our zones. And then your DMR software over here, this is just letting you, when you flip to that zone, these are the default talk groups that come up in the A VFO and the B VFO in this radio. I think we're almost done with slides. The last thing I want to mention is talker alias, and this is cool. And a newer feature, newer last 3-4 years maybe. Not all radios will support this, but if yours does, turn it on. So what talker alias does is let me set up my radio so that whenever you and I have a DMR conversation or I'm in a DMR talk group worldwide, my radio is going to send a small data stream that says whatever I want. And if any of you ever use D-Star kind of has this too, where they'll put WT1W and then the slash thing, and then I can type 9700 or D74 or whatever. So this is kind of the same thing. So I can set my talker alias to say Jim, and there's a story behind Jim. I don't know if John's ever told you that. I saw you use Jim in the email. I can set my talker alias to say Jim WT1W, or I can set it to say Big Jim WT1W. And if you have talker alias on, regardless of whether you have that database of all the hams, you will see Jim WT1W instead of my DMR ID of 315-2157. So if you have a radio that doesn't support talker alias, and older DMR radios may or may not, I want to say talker alias is about 3 or 4 years old. Your radio might make a clicking sound. When I key up, you might hear or something like that, and then you'll hear me. The ticking is the data stream that your radio doesn't know how to interpret. That's all that is. So you can turn it on in your radio and leave it on. Everybody doesn't have to have talker alias on to talk to you, but if they have talker alias on, they're sending that data stream, and your radio will decode that data stream, and you should catch their name. And this is the logic that talker alias that your DMR radio uses. If you have local contacts, if you put in Jim and you put in TO and you put in John and Andy and whoever, when you get a call from me, if you have my DMR info out of the master database, that's what the radio is going to use. And it's going to pull up Jim Perry, Alabama, WT1W, whatever's in there. I can't remember. If you don't have the database, then the radio is going to check to see if it got talker alias data. And you would get, in the case of the example I just mentioned, Big Jim WT1W. If you don't have either of those, then you're going to get my raw ID, and it will just say 315-2157, and that's all you're going to see. And you would have to say, who this? Or I would key up and say, hey, this is Jim. So that is talker alias, and that's a reasonably new feature, and it's implemented in a lot of radios, and most of it is in software. I don't think there's any specific hardware requirements. It just depends on your firmware for your radio and CPS software. And that is all the slides I have. And we could do that now, so I could be not look at my giant face. Oh. And I have done, so I have a YouTube channel, and I've got a video or three out there about DMR that are edited for, obviously not me prattling for 40 minutes, but it's basically, if you just can get those steps down and realize that your DMR software, while it may not look like that DMR software, it's still got all the exact same stuff in it, and you do it in order. Put in your radio, your DMR ID first, any specific contacts you want, me, John, T.O., whoever, or none, doesn't matter. And then the next thing you do is put in the talk groups you want, and then you build your channels based on your talk groups and any other digital individual contacts you have. Zone it, and I would highly recommend you zone it, because you'll hate yourself if you put in 38. I had 38 channels listed there. If I didn't have them in zones, I'd just get pissed off and throw the radio at the wall trying to find somebody, right?
Yep.
So,
hey, Jim, we did have a question from the chat.
Sure,
asking,
please.
Let me read that to you real quick here. Bear with me just a second.
Can I see that? I think I can see the chat.
Yeah, can you explain the downloading process, finding the database to populate the database into Chirp or etc.?
Google is your friend. So I've used Chirp occasionally, mostly not. Not because Chirp is not any good, it's just because I don't use it. I think radioid.net has the database out there, and you have to have an account, I believe. I can't remember because I haven't done it in forever. I quit loading the database into my radios. You also can get the database from various other places. And again, I'm not trying to be flippant. Google it.
Yeah.
BTEC, if you have a BTEC account, I believe BTEC has the database on their website, or a link to it on their site. And I would recommend that if you're going to download the master contact database, all the peoples, that you find some place where you can filter it, because unless you have a very new DMR radio, you're not going to be able to load 240,000 contacts. I think the DMR radio, the BTEC 6X2 Pro, which is their newest model of the 6X2, I think it'll do 300,000 contacts if memory serves. But there's multiple sites where you can find the database.
Cool. Any other questions we have?
They're all probably praying I'll quit talking.
Hey, Jim, throw out your YouTube channel.
Sure. FEPLABS Radio. All one word. John's posted it in the chat.
No, I think actually Danny did that.
Well, okay. Oh, it does say Danny. Thank you, Danny.
Yes. Because Danny's much more caring a person than I am.
I get that. Having hung around you a fair amount. Yeah, I get that. And Danny doesn't send me freaky pictures.
Yeah, well, you're getting some more. That's payment for the
the coming
on. Yeah. Anybody else have questions about DMR or anything in general?
Let me throw a couple of things out. So the YouTube channel, I have DMR videos on there that go over this same kind of thing with better screenshots. Also, what was I going to say? Oh, so I put out regular videos, typically one a week. They tend to be on the more technical side because that's my background. Not too much in antenna testing. I don't build antennas on the regular. I use antennas, but and then like John mentioned, every Sunday morning I do a live stream. I did not name it Ham Church, so don't be offended. I didn't name it that. But it happens at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, and the will of the people.
10 o'clock East Coast time.
Yeah, 10 o'clock East Coast time. I'm on the right time. You people are in the wrong time zone. So anyway, that's a live stream. We talk about ham radio related stuff. There's not specifically a general topic. I pull a whole lot of news items from across the interwebs, and we'll cover those. We will complain about what radio manufacturers are doing right or wrong, as the case may be. And, whatever kind of things go on in the chat. We generally have around 150, 200 people for the live stream. So everything ham radio related in one way or another at some point during the show, and it lasts an hour. And then, like I said, typically one video a week on regular YouTube. So like, share, and subscribe,
Yeah. I think we got another question. Jamie
Sure.
asked, what's the benefits of using DMR?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that because that was actually one of the things I wanted to mention and I forgot it. Now I remember. Thank you. Um, there is no specific benefit of DMR over any other digital mode. The only benefit of a digital mode over analog is that digital works until it don't. Analog, you're going to be able to hear something, but it may be full of static. With digital, that cutoff is a lot harsher. You're not going to have a lot of barely able to understand, John. It'll just quit working when you lose range because it has to do the math to code and to decode and encode the data stream. It's a clearer signal. It's the same as digital satellite. If you ever had that, when it works, it works. When it doesn't, it artifacts a little bit and then it goes away immediately. And then it comes back like nothing was ever wrong. There's no moving the rabbit ears like we did when our parents told us to move the stuff on the TV around. The other thing I wanted to mention about DMR, there are a lot of people that will say, oh, digital radio sounds terrible. It's like Donald Duck. And I know one person in particular who vetches about it constantly on every live stream he's been at that I'm on. And I hate digital radio because it sounds like Donald Duck talking. Or you also get people that say DMR sounds worse than D-Star or Fusion sounds the best. In my opinion, there's not a nickel's worth of difference between any of them. Most of the problems that are perceived with digital radio are from people that just don't have modulation set right or are having internet problems and they're trying to use a hotspot. That's it. That is the only problems I typically have seen with digital voice. The beauty of digital voice is, with the help of the internet, I can listen to CQ Scotland and soak in those wonderful Scottish accents. And you can call Alabama Link and listen to all of us hillbillies down here talking in Southern. So, that's the upside to digital radio, is it's worldwide, as opposed to analog, which is not without internet linked repeaters. So,
yeah, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I'm Gary, WD8P, and do you prefer one brand DMR radio over another?
Gary, you just hit the other thing I should have mentioned. Thank you, sir. The other thing I've seen, okay, first of all, BTEC or Anytone seems to be the best DMR radios. And they are basically the same radio. I think it's the Anytone 878 and the BTEC 6X2 are like the same radio, literally. They have the same keypad, the same stinking menu. The only thing that's different is the label that's on the front of them, as far as I know. I get my BTEC firmware from BTEC's website. I don't know why they decided to name their company Baofeng Tech, but it says BTEC on the radio, and it is not a Baofeng. But no one asked me when they named it. It is the same radio as the Anytone. Anytone makes excellent DMR radios and generally very good CPS software. And BTEC is basically the same stuff. So those are the two I would recommend. I have BTEC. I have an older model BTEC 6X2. It's a tank. It works perfectly every time. It does all the things. I will tell you that not all DMR radios are made the same. There are some older ones, and they're literally Baofengs. I have a Baofeng DM1801 that is a turd, sir, an absolute turd. And typically the people who have problems with DMR, I mentioned overmodulation, or they have a $50 DMR radio that they got off of Temu while they were drunk one night, and it has a $50 Temu speaker in it, and it sounds like crap. The digital stuff all works fine. And again, D-Star, DMR, Fusion, I really can't tell a nickel's worth of difference between the audio. And maybe I'm just tone deaf. I don't know. I was in marching band for years and the military and the fire department, so might be.
Well, I've got a follow-up.
Sure.
So if you have a code plug on brand X and you decide to go to Anytone, for example, how do you carry over your code plug? I mean, is there Is there a secret recipe for doing that?
It is possible that I can't think of the name. There's a couple ways you can do it. It's not a bulletproof process. So for example, on the BTEC, and I think some of the other ones have this too, I can go into the CPS and tell it to export all my digital contacts, and it'll puke it out to a comma separated file. And I can export all my talk group contacts, and it'll puke it out to a comma separated file. And then I could go to my new CPS, assuming it has an import feature, and I can import my contacts and my names that way. It depends on the CPS software. It's not real consistent among vendors. Again, the BTEC software is good. The Anytone software is good. They both have the import and export feature. Generally, the formats are going to be the same across all the radios because it's a standard. It's been around for a while. This is Tier 2 DMR, I believe. Tier 3 is trunking. So it's going to be pretty much all the same format anyway, but you have to have that import and export function. I want to say, and I'm fuzzy on this one, there's a program called Contact Manager or something like that. Maybe DMR Contact Manager. And I think it handles, I know there's a program, and I think that's the name, and it handles some of that transliteration, possibly between various versions of CPS. If you can't do the export import, it's going to be the Mark I eyeball and looking at the old CPS and typing it in the new CPS. So it depends. There's some ways to do it, but it's not a bulletproof thing.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. You're welcome.
So it says TYT 350 that works great and the sound quality is fabulous. So
yeah,
TYT makes some good stuff. I've got a few TYT DMRs.
Yes. I think I've had one or two. I get a lot of radios to fool with, and I don't remember 90% of them.
A lot of folks in this area have them, especially in our club, because we've got a distributor for TYT in town. So we can go and pick one up same day.
So I will share a little bit of an anecdote about DMR. I mentioned that you don't have to have the internet. So a use case I have for that is we have a prepper group here in my area. I know you're surprised by that in Alabama. And the guy that kind of is in charge of it, he's a good friend of mine. He asked me about it because they all had bought Baofangs and had them in foil-lined garbage cans. And that was their, no, I don't have a question for myself. That was their prepping they had done. So they had like $25 fangs, and that was their whole radio comm plan. And he said, is this viable? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know how good your trash can's going to work if it's an EMP for real, but that's a whole different story. And he said, well, we want something that we can talk, but privately. And I'm like, okay. So I kind of gave him the spiel about, I don't know how the FCC would feel about this, but since this is a balloon goes up situation, what I programmed for them and what I set up for them was a comm plan. And again, you can do this for your club. This was just a bunch of prepper guys, not weird preppers, just, I would call them suburban preppers. What I did for them is they all bought DMR radios, not all the same kind, but I set up a comm plan for them where I came up with, I don't remember now, 3 or 4 different channels for group calls, you know, like a logistics group and a support group and a food group. I don't remember what I used, whatever they wanted. And then I assigned each of them an ID number, and I just used 4 digits. I started with 1,000 and went through 1,025 or whatever it was. So their radios are not going to connect to a hotspot. They're on low power local repeater simplex DMR kind of frequency, like you'd use in a hotspot, not a repeater, but a local simplex DMR frequency. I'll get this right in a minute. A local simplex UHF frequency. And I said, legally it's a ham frequency. I don't know anything about it, but you know, if the balloon goes up, I don't think the FCC is going to worry about it a whole lot. And their whole setup now is on DMR, and they can DMR themselves to death digital all they want. They've got their multiple channels. They think it's the coolest thing in the world. And that's a cool thing about DMR. You can't really do that with Fusion as easily. I think you can set up separate Fusion talk groups on Fusion and something similar on D-Star, but I really don't know how to do it off the top of my head. I think you can, but I'm not sure. So that's the beauty of DMR, is honestly, it is really easy to create your own private, non-international talk groups that only your group is going to use. So again, an Aries group or a Races group, or the group that's coordinating the food for field day, which is an important function, you know, that kind of thing. So that's one of the major benefits of something like DMR. And it's digital, which is real clear sound.
Do we have any other questions? Well, Jim, thank you so much for doing this. It's been a pleasure to have you. And you guys go and like and subscribe to Jim's channel if you're not already an FEP Lab rat. Get in there and go visit Ham Church on Sunday morning. It is a heck of a lot of fun to razz these guys from the chat too. So anyways, well, thank you all for coming. Working on next month's presentation, and we'll get back to you on that. And again, Jim, thank you so very much. We do appreciate you.
Oh, you're welcome, guys. Anytime.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Do that.